China lifted the lockdown last week, but now more places inside China are starting a second round of lockdowns. A woman in Wuhan saw her husband tied up on the hospital bed before he died, as the hospital refused to treat him. Now the woman is left alone with her 2 kids. One Chinese province reports new numbers of imported infection cases on the same day, this in conflict with the official figures. A Senate committee is about to investigate the origins of the CCP virus pandemic and the worldwide initial response. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A Senate committee is about to investigate the origins of the CCP virus pandemic and the worldwide initial response. At home, why the U.S. national stockpile wasn't better prepared and why medical devices and supplies are manufactured overseas will be investigated. But the focus of the investigation will be China and the WHO. Senator Ron Johnson says getting information sooner would have helped the United States develop an accurate lab test faster. The investigation will examine if the WHO helped cover up the outbreak. This part of the investigation will be led by Senator Rick Scott. Scott said in a recent interview, quote, "We can't trust communist China. We have learned we can't trust the WHO because they lie to us." The Guardian reported on April 12th that British intelligence agencies believe its government must reassess its relationship with China. The report said MI6, MI5, and the Foreign Intelligence Service believe the Chinese Communist Party will continue pushing its one-party model and saying it successfully tackled the pandemic. The agencies are telling the Britain's leaders to think about how to respond and to focus more on investigating China. MI6 reportedly said China has been seriously misreporting the CCP virus numbers. Now to China. The outbreak of the CCP virus had an impact on China's economics in the first quarter. According to Chinese Customs Agency, overall Chinese exports fell 11.4% in the first quarter. The trade surplus declined about 80%. Chinese exports to the U.S. fell 23.6%.
贸易顺差 983.3亿元，减少 80.6%。
China imported about $5 billion worth of U.S. agricultural products in the first quarter, including twice as many U.S. soybeans and 6 times more pork than a year ago. This week, more places in China started the second round of lockdowns. A document circulating on social media appears to be an emergency notice from a county in Hebei province. It was issued on April 13th and asks all cities and villages to restore lockdown measures and resume measuring body temperatures and registering people traveling from overseas or from Hubei province. One netizen wrote Chinese authorities are covering up the epidemic to encourage people to go back to work. That means an outbreak, even a devastating outbreak, is coming again. Conflicting reports on the number of virus cases in one Chinese province. The health commissioner of Heilongjiang reporting 78 imported cases in the province as of April 12th midnight. But on the same day, the mayor of a border city in Heilongjiang says his city has seen over 200 imported cases. That's from March 21st to April 12th midnight.
目前呢，累计报告的这个确诊病例呢是243例。
The commissioner of the Federal Communications Commission, Brendan Carr, asked Chinese authorities to undisappear Dr. Ai Fen from Wuhan. Ms. Ai passed on medical diagnosis about the CCP virus to whistleblower Dr. Li Wenliang. A video has now appeared on Ms. Ai's social media account.
2020年4月13号下午2点半钟。
She's standing in front of the emergency building of Central Hospital of Wuhan. She says it's April 13th and that she's working as usual and everything is well. But no media can reach her or ask her questions. It's unknown if she made the video under pressure from the authorities. And in the race to develop a vaccine, 2 pharmaceutical giants are teaming up in an unprecedented move to create a vaccine to combat the CCP virus. GlaxoSmithKline and Sanofi have put aside their differences for now and announced they're teaming up to develop a vaccine that enhances the immune system. GSK hopes by joining forces, the vaccine can be developed much faster. It can often take up to a decade to get a new vaccine. And Johnson & Johnson aimed to produce up to 900 million doses of its potential vaccine by April 2021. That's if test trials go well. Human testing is set to begin in September. A Wuhan woman tells us about the circumstances surrounding her husband's death. She says when he fell ill near the start of the epidemic, the hospital refused to treat him. NTD's Chu Wen-rong has the story.
A Wuhan woman says her 47-year-old husband was tied to a hospital bed for 3 days, still conscious until he died.
He said he was feeling unwell. The doctors didn't really try to rescue him, so he was just tied up on the hospital bed so that he could not move. He kept saying he was unwell. The doctor said he won't make it. The nurse even wrote he was unconscious, but he kept mumbling day and night.
Xiang is a Wuhan resident who has 2 kids. Her husband died in the hospital on January 25th after running a high fever for 4 or 5 days.
In the beginning, he had no fever. He went to the hospital to see a doctor and stayed there for 7 or 8 days. The hospital said that his illness was very complicated and he had to go to the intensive care unit.
Xiang's husband had diabetes. After a week in the hospital, he was transferred from the intensive care unit. The hospital said the intensive care unit had to close, but they didn't tell her the reason.
The doctor said he would be transferred to a general ward. I was happy in the beginning, thinking that his illness was cured. I could finally be with him. But by then, he had high fever every day.
Just a few days later, she says he was in a critical condition. Xiang had to sign a bunch of papers. She didn't try to understand what she was signing because she just wanted to save her husband's life.
I think the hospital is all about the money. To save someone, you need to pay first. They put a bunch of papers in front of you for you to sign, and since you want to save a life, would you read over 10 piles of paper?
She added when her husband was in critical condition, doctors made every excuse to refuse treatment.
They said that there was no ward nor intensive care unit available. No one was willing to accept him. The doctor said that you should be happy to have a hospital bed. Some people can't even get a hospital bed.
She says that the doctors also refused to give him medicine and told her to buy it herself. The doctors diagnosed Xiang's husband as having severe pneumonia, but she believes that he contracted the CCP virus at the hospital.
I can only count this as bad luck, unfortunate. What else can I do?
She's now left with her 2 daughters, aged 3 and 22 years old. She said she can only hope that the future will be bright. Reporting by Hong Ning and Chu Wen-rong, NTD News.
Gratitude today on Capitol Hill. President Trump welcomed survivors of the CCP virus to the White House today to share their unique stories of recovery after facing the worst.
President Trump on Tuesday thanked a group of survivors for gathering at the White House following their recent battle with and recovery from the virus.
They've all got very interesting and very different stories to tell.
He called them all very brave, adding that for some, the sickness brought them to the edge of life. The president went around the table, inviting the guests to share their stories. Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib began, expressing her appreciation for the president's actions taken to fight the virus.
Had you not brought this to the forefront of the HQ, of being able to put this out here, I wouldn't be here today to even have this conversation with you and to be able to talk about the needs of Detroit.
Across the table, Trump recognized former NFL football player Mark Campbell, a friend of Tom Brady's, who he said didn't feel so powerful while sickened.
And he was hit hard. Yes, and you weren't so strong when you got hit by that.
No, I didn't feel strong at all at that
point. The president reiterated that progress is being made on a vaccine, as well as therapeutic treatments, and expressed hope for a cure.
The U.S. will halt funding to the World Health Organization as it investigates its role in the pandemic. The U.S. is by far the biggest contributor, fronting around $500 million per year. China gives around $40 million.
The world depends on the WHO to work with countries to ensure that accurate information about international health threats is shared in a timely manner. And if it's not, to independently tell the world the truth about what is happening. The WHO failed in this basic duty and must be held accountable.
Trump says the WHO ignored anything conflicting with the Chinese regime's account. That includes human-to-human transmission of the virus. The WHO knew about it in December, but denied it until January.
The silence of the WHO on the disappearance of scientific researchers and doctors, and on new restrictions on the sharing of research into the origins of COVID-19.
The president said he's glad he closed the border with China, even though the WHO told him not to. He said if other countries had followed his lead, many more lives would have been saved.
American manufacturers have committed to making more ventilators under the Defense Production Act. It allows the president to order private companies to produce critical supplies. He says the U.S. should now have more ventilators than it needs to fight the pandemic.
5 new ventilator contracts have been announced under the Defense Production Act. Private manufacturers, including GE and Hamilton, will now produce 130,000 of them by the end of the year, with 30,000 due for delivery next month.
We're probably not going to need them, but we can add that to our stockpile, which is very big, and we can move it around should the surge take place and should it be a very substantial surge. We're ready to rock.
Ventilators are complicated and expensive pieces of technology. Not every country has the capacity to manufacture them. If there's excess, Trump wants to send them to other hard-hit countries like Italy or the UK.
Outside of our country, they're calling me, every country, they're calling me, so many countries, and I'm going to try and help them because we have thousands of ventilators being built.
The CCP virus can cause serious respiratory problems for patients, and those put on ventilators have a low rate of survival. But recently, long-term ventilator recovery rates have been improving. Louisiana reporting that 40% of its ventilator patients are leaving the hospital. Reporting by Paul Graney, NTD News.
New York has suffered about 11,000 deaths from the CCP virus. While hospitalizations are going down, unfortunately, the daily death toll is not. There are still close to 800 deaths per day.
Of the nearly 500,000 people tested for the CCP virus in New York, around 42,000 have been hospitalized. The number of hospitalizations continues to flatline, as it has for the past week.
Technically, tick down, which is probably the first tick down, so that's a good sign.
But the number of people dying from the CCP virus is not dropping. New York lost 778 lives yesterday. Governor Cuomo is working with 6 surrounding states on a plan to reopen. He and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio emphasized that more testing is crucial for reopening. De Blasio announced today that the city will make test kits starting in May.
50,000 tests per week to begin. And if we can go farther, we're going to build it up rapidly.
Joining this effort will be universities, research labs, local manufacturers, and 3D printing companies. Melina Weisskopf, NTD News, New York.
In addition, New York City will begin buying 50,000 test kits per week from Aria Diagnostics. The Indiana company previously donated 50,000 kits to New York. The governor of New Jersey today thanking Taiwan after receiving the first batch of mask donations to help combat the CCP virus. 100,000 masks arrived in New Jersey over the weekend. Co-chair of the U.S. Congressional Taiwan Caucus says the masks will go to frontline medical workers, and another 200,000 masks are set to arrive. The government of Taiwan said it will donate a total of 2 million masks to the U.S. and 8 million to Europe. A group of Navy ships will remain at sea away from the CCP virus and ready for action. They are now the only remaining on-call strike group off the east coast of the U.S.
A group of Navy ships will remain at sea even though their deployment is over. The Navy wants to keep them off land and free of the CCP virus. The group of ships is called the Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group and includes the USS Harry S. Truman aircraft carrier and supporting ships. This group of ships has managed to stay free of the CCP virus. They are the last remaining on-call strike group off the east coast of the U.S. The Navy needs them to remain ready in case needed, mainly by keeping everybody on board healthy. A U.S. sailor just died on the USS Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier in Guam. The ship was the subject of controversy about how the Navy handled an outbreak of the CCP virus on board. The captain was fired for speaking out about it, and the acting Navy secretary resigned after firing him. But the Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group has followed strict safety protocol and limits the crew's interaction with people not from the ship, including with pilots that have to land on board to deliver supplies.
The International Monetary Fund is predicting the global economy will shrink a significant 3% this year. This estimate is due to lockdowns ordered across the world to slow the spread of the CCP virus. The organization's chief economist says the Great Lockdown could lead to the worst recession since the Great Depression.
The International Monetary Fund, or IMF, is predicting global economic output will shrink by 3% in 2020. The organization also forecasts a loss to global GDP of $9 trillion for this year and the next. Chief economist at the IMF, Geeta Gopinath, says lockdowns save lives, which allow the economy to pick up when the crisis is over.
Flattening the spread of COVID-19 using lockdowns allows health systems to cope with this crisis, which then permits a resumption of economic activity. In this sense, there is no trade-off between saving lives and saving livelihoods.
Back in January, the IMF's World Economic Outlook saw this year's economy rising about 3%, making the new projection a 6.3% downgrade. Gopinath says what she calls the Great Lockdown could lead to the worst recession since the Great Depression, far worse than the 2008 financial crisis. But Gopinath adds that the predictions come in spite of substantial uncertainties regarding the way the virus spreads. That includes how useful containment measures are and what therapies or vaccines become available. The fund expects the U.S. economy to contract nearly 6% this year, but predicts a 5% expansion in 2021. It also forecasts that China, the world's second largest economy, will have a small net growth this year as the outbreak already peaked in the first quarter. But some economists say China is faced with two dire problems: a severe drop in demand for exports and a potential second wave of infection hitting the country.
And the world's biggest lockdown continues as the number of virus cases rises in India.
And Russia's rose growers are forced to destroy their flowers after a virus-related plunge in sales. In a country where flowers are so popular that some florists operate around the clock, 1.2 million roses are now destroyed each day. India is extending the lockdown for its 1.3 billion people until May 3rd, as its number of confirmed cases rises to 10,000. Since India first imposed the lockdown in late March, the unemployment rate has almost doubled, now around 14.5%. The number of infections has now surpassed 21,000 in Russia. The local Moscow government introduced tougher measures to curb the spread of the virus. Police checkpoints and round-the-clock patrols have been set up around the region to ensure that only residents enter the capital and that they have a valid reason. European countries are also taking different approaches. Spain and Austria allowed partial returns to work on Tuesday. Britain and France, on the other hand, extended lockdown measures. In Italy, some businesses, including bookstores, stationers, and shops selling children's clothing, were allowed to open their doors. In the Veneto region, another restriction was lifted, one that required joggers to stay within 200 yards of their house.
Thanks for watching China in Focus by NTD. We are here to bring you the latest, honest, unbiased news. Don't forget to follow us on social media for the latest updates. See you next time.